Hi guys, and welcome back to yet another podcast in cars. Yes, my car is still stationary. Unfortunately for right now, Anyway, in today's video, we're going to be discussing: does modding lower the reliability of your car? Now, this is a pretty good one because considering the current situation with my car, so I thought it would be a nice one to discuss in today's video. It is terribly cold, so if I start shivering and turning blue, call for help. Anyway. So let me put it this way, where I stand on the whole thing, because I was thinking about it a little bit earlier. It really does depend on the car from a base anyway. So, and it also depends on like how extreme you're going, if that makes sense. Because, for example, adding an intake pipe like I did and an exhaust system, like a headers and a downpipe. Now, we're talking about any car here, not necessarily a Miata. We can talk about a Suzuki Swift, like my girlfriend's. We can be talking about a Golf, a BM, a Ferrari even, you know? It can be literally anywhere along that scale, anywhere along the car scale. I don't think such small mods is that extravagant and it does anything to the car. That won't really change reliability. Now, obviously, technically speaking, it does add more performance to the car, especially obviously if you've had it tuned to match the now extra flow and stuff. It can change, obviously, the horsepower. There might be more horsepower, which puts things under a little bit more pressure. But honestly, you shouldn't have such a big gap that it increases the horsepower by so much that it could actually cause damages elsewhere. With me mentioning a tune to obviously have that done, I would also like to mention, I know this from McLaren's, so I can't really comment on BMWs, Audis, modern Mazdas, and so on and so forth. I can't really comment. However, I do know that there are tunes available, I have that in commas for reasons, that can really seriously damage the car. The one that I'm talking about with in terms of the McLarens is apparently they raise the rev limiter, and that causes valve float, and then people blow up their McLaren engines, which you can imagine is an expensive exercise to fix. My point is, though, that as long as you're respectful with a tune, so you retune it, yes, to add the extra horsepower because now you've got extra flow, but you don't fiddle with like your RPM limits or boost settings or anything like that if your car's already pre-turbocharged. You just leave it to just flow a little bit nicer. You won't really have any problems. And to be honest with you, as in per discussion of last week's video, horsepower isn't everything. Even if your car is turbocharged from factory and all you do is an intake and exhaust, yes, technically speaking, you might be able to up the boost with your tune, obviously, and so on and so forth. I wouldn't recommend doing it. I'd rather leave the boost where it is, but now with the extra flow, technically speaking, you should actually get an earlier spool, which you'll probably find more entertaining. I don't know, plus minus. Some people like a big laggy point and then the turbo kicks in, but my point. So that's where I stand on that basis. When you so basic that it's very minimal mods, basically like coilovers, an exhaust and intake, stuff like that. You shouldn't really have any damage. And obviously there are engine mods. Oh gosh, it got dark. Oh, it's night again. A cloud clearly passed us. So my meaning is that, you know, basic stuff won't do that. It's when you start going into like heavier mods and stuff that you could properly potentially start damaging things. Obviously, you know, you can do engine mods that won't damage things, like a catch can. Catch can's always a good idea. That won't damage anything. All it's doing is just routing air through something to separate the oil, so that it actually will probably increase your engine's life expectancy. So there are mods that you can do that will increase life expectancy as well. They're just not that common or popular because people just like blowing up their engines, apparently. Now, continuing from my point, when you start going a little bit more crazy, aka taking a naturally aspirated car and turbocharging it or supercharging it, adding extra boost, almost doubling the horsepower, if not even going more extreme and going more than that, things can start to build up and have extra issues. For example, my car, despite having completely brand new gaskets around the entire engine after the rebuild, still has an oil leak. Don't know why, don't know from where. I think it's actually from my gearbox and not from my engine side, so I will comment on that when we pull the gearbox out for the clutch. But yeah, but it's still got an oil leak. It's still got coolant leak for some reason. One of the coolant lines, despite also all being replaced. But that is to be expected, considering the fact that a from factory 90 horsepower engine is now making 220. You can imagine that it's probably pushing itself a bit there. So yeah, to be fair, these engines were originally designed, but my meaning is as a basis, not every engine was originally designed to be turbocharged and then brought down. So yeah, from my personal experience, adding a little bit extra oomph to your car, like I did, yes, for a Miata it sounds like a very big gap in horsepower, but you know, keeping in mind the engine was originally designed to be turbocharged, blah 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 blah. We've been through this multiple times on my channel before, and if you guys have any experience with Miatas, you all know this anyway. These engines can hold about 200 horsepower and they're still quite reliable, all stock internals and so on and so forth. I rebuilt my engine to be safe, and also because there were other problems, but technically speaking, you don't have to rebuild it to turbocharge it. Callum's done that, and his car's been daily driven for 5 years with the turbocharger kit, making just as much horsepower as mine does, and he's fine. It's just his car was better taken care of by previous owners. When you start going extravagant amounts of numbers, so for example, I've seen like 500 horsepower Miatas in the States. That's where stuff starts to go a bit extravagant. I keep referring to Miatas, I'm sorry. You know, things, it's just easier for me to relate because obviously it's content that I absorb myself, so I'm more aware of it. I'm sure there's plenty of other cars out there, and I'm just meaning this as a basis. But, you know, again, there's like 500 horsepower Miatas out there. Those are dodgy, if you will, because, you know, you have to get like a custom gearbox almost made with a custom adaptation plate to mate to the back of your engine's block, and that gearbox might not last. Literally, you might shred the gears. The diff is in the same position. The diff, you know, maybe the arms of the diff aren't strong enough and it tears. I've seen stuff like that before. But that's because the engine's making literally 5 times more the horsepower than it was originally made to do. Well, I suppose that would have been the 1.8, so 1.8 would have made like 120 horsepower, but you guys get my point. It's making almost 5 times the amount of horsepower that it was originally supposed to. That's where shit starts going a little bit more extreme. And in that regard, yes, I'd like to argue that it does lower reliability. For everything else, also considering what I've done with my car, no. Like, you can get away with it as long as you're respectful and you take care of the car and you're taking extra precautions. Don't buy bullshit parts. Don't go buy cheap parts from wherever and then slap that on your car and expect it to work as well as a genuine part from a genuine company. Of course, it's not going to last. Also, perhaps don't try to be fancy like me and get a fancy clutch custom built for you, and then it doesn't work. With that being said, I got a custom manifold made, and that manifold flows ridiculously well and is quite strong. It's just a little bit ugly is the only thing. My point. Um, Now I suppose we go on to a further extreme of like engine swaps and that kind of stuff. Or, I mean, we have seen on the internet before taking the engine from the front and putting it as a mid engine and so on and so forth. That kind of stuff, I feel like the moment you move the engine, uh, or if it's not in the original car that it was designed to be in, things can get a bit dodgy. I've seen engine swaps where the engine was literally a 2 mile engine, literally came out of a brand new car. If anything, I don't even think it was in a car. I think it was literally made by whoever, Toyota or whoever, literally just put it in a box and then shipped to this dude. And he put it in his car and it had issues. It had no miles on it, but okay, I say it had issues. It was just how do I describe? The engine didn't want to cooperate as nicely as it could have, and that's just because of the fact that it was not necessarily how it was meant to be. I don't know how to explain it properly, but if anybody has looked into engine swaps and has watched people do engine swaps and stuff, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Just sometimes the engines just don't want to be where they are. I don't know if it has to do with the climate. I don't know if it has to do with the fact that maybe the engine's too big for the engine bay and then it has more heat around it, which just affects it this so much so more, and then it has other issues. I don't know. But if anybody's looked into engine swaps, you kind of know exactly what I mean. With that being said, we also have Corin, which people will remember from the channel, with the Midnight Purple 200SX, who has the RB25 under the hood. He has no issues with his car. I think the most that he has with his car is on the odd occasion his battery dies because he has a small battery, like me, but his whole setup is a lot more intense. So I think he has battery issues every now and then. I don't think he's ever really had engine issues. To be fair, I know that it's a full internal, like forged and stuff, and he's just got a small turbo on it for right now because he doesn't want to overdo it. I know he's got a better manifold and turbo made up and stuff. It's just he's waiting to put it on. Anyway, my point is, it really depends on how you go about it. You know, if you go pretty much the same route as me, where you're willing to pay good money to send it to good engineers and have your engine completely overhauled with fantastic parts and good gaskets and so on and so forth, and you essentially overbuild and overspec the engine, then you toss it in and you're only asking it to do this much work. The engine's capable of doing like this much, okay? But you're only asking it to do this much. Then, yeah, it'll be fine because the engine's not actually seeing a hard day's work. It's actually the secret to Toyota and Lexus's reliability. They make engines that are capable of making pretty big horsepower or towing capability or big power in general, whatever. But they only ask it to do such a small amount that, you know, the engine never really sees a hard day's work, which means that it's not necessarily very efficient because it might use extra fuel because, yeah, or so on and so forth, but you then paying for the reliability. That's how I see things on this front as well. I'd much rather spend, I think I worked it out the other day, I think I paid like somewhere in the 30,000 or so to rebuild my engine. My engine, the engine side has no issues. I've got a small coolant leak. I think that's just because we haven't put the pipe on nicely, and that one piece we didn't actually replace. So, yeah. But they're completely fine. My engine is 100%, and it's been running with the turbo for now a bit, and no issues whatsoever. I actually continuously check my oil catch can, and I don't even have blow-by. Despite having double the horsepower that the car was originally intended to have, no blow-by, nothing. I've got a perfectly healthy engine. It's completely fine. It's unfortunately just my clutch that's having issues currently. What else was I going to say now? I had something in mind with my engine. I've noticed that occasionally it has like a little bit of it eats a little bit of oil. But all things considered, it is a 30-year-old car. Irrelevant if it's fully rebuilt or not, it's gonna have issues like that, let's be honest here. But what I was trying to mean earlier, on as long as you're not going extravagant with the amount of horsepower that you're adding and stuff, I'm gonna relate it back to the supercars and the 1,000 horsepower Lamborghini Huracans and Audi R8s and the twin turbo Corvettes and stuff. For those cars, yes, those engines are pretty pristine and actually quite well built, all things considered, especially German engineering for the Lambo and the Audi. Yes, it's the same engine, so it is German engineering. Anyway, my point there was, although those cars are making 1,000 horsepower or such, they're only pushing, I think, the same amount of boost that I am. They're like pushing at most like 0.6, which is nothing. Most stock engines, most naturally aspirated engines, can get to about 0.6, 0.5 maybe, depends on the engine, depends on the displacement and so on and so forth. And they'll make a small amount of boost, but they'll make extravagant amounts of horsepower from that. Now, obviously, I have seen the Lambos that are pushing 2,000 horsepower and so on and so forth, and they're actually okay. I don't think you could daily drive that, to be 100% honest. But my point is, those engines still hold up and stuff. That's because I believe that those engines are very highly overbuilt. It's kind of the same story as the 2JZ. The 2JZ was built with like almost completely forged internals, if I'm right. I can't really remember, but I know a stock engine can pretty much get to about 400 horsepower when you start over boosting, inverted commas. When you start pushing the boost up, you can get to like 400 horsepower. With a built head, you can get to about 700 or so. Obviously, I suppose it does depend on what fuel type you're running and so on and so forth, and your tuner and blah blah blah, but yeah. So my meaning is, sometimes engines are overbuilt and they can handle a lot more horsepower. As a general rule of thumb, it kind of depends on how much boost you're running or how much horsepower you expect to be making over stock. As long as it's nothing extravagant, generally speaking, you can get away with it and your car will be completely reliable. My car, I feel, would be reliable if I maybe just wasn't as fancy as I was and I just got a normal puck clutch instead of the hybrid clutch. I went for the hybrid clutch because I daily drive the car. Sometimes I get stuck in 2-hour-long traffic jams. I don't really want to be, going with a on-off switch clutch. So, yeah. But with that being said, I could have paid extravagant amounts of money and bought like a 6-puck clutch, and imported it from the States, and it would have been very fancy, and I wouldn't have been as shuddery, and I could have daily driven it still, and blah 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 blah. It's just out of my budget, unfortunately. But my point is, all completely reliable, technically speaking. My engine's not really had any issues. The only issues I have experienced is unfortunately just weird little minute things, but they're also easy to fix things, so I don't really know if I'd count them as reliability issues, because if you don't catch it, then yes, it might cause a damaging issue. But most of us who are modifying our cars, like we have been discussing for this full video, we can kind of hear our cars, and we can hear when things are sounding maybe a little bit off, and we know that, oh shit, something's not right. For example, the other day, I tried to start my car, and it was quite cold, like it is now, and I tried to start my car, and it would not hold an idle. It kept stalling out. It would not hold an idle. I had to keep my throttle in for a little bit until the car warmed up a little bit, then I could let go of the throttle, and it would finally hold its idle. What had happened there is my fuel pressure moved. I don't know why my fuel pressure moved. And then weirdly enough, so I adjusted the fuel pressure so that it would idle properly, because I know how to do that, and it's an easy thing to adjust. I adjusted it, And then later I had to adjust it back anyway because that's where it was supposed to be, but my car just had a weird start for some issue. My point is that us who know cars and know our cars, we should be able to tell, oh, something's a little bit funky, maybe let me not hammer on the car right now because it's going to cause an issue. And then if you drive it nice and relaxed, it's not really going to have an issue. Or, for example, my car now with the turbo is limited to 95. There will be people out there that would run 93, or maybe they don't have the option to run 95, so they put it in 93 until they can get 95. They also will probably know, okay, let me not go into boost because it might cause knock, or maybe they've got a knock sensor and it will down the boost and stuff, so you haven't got as much horsepower, but at least you can still enjoy the car and play with it. That's where my whole philosophy and thoughts come in. As long as you're doing preventative mods, like a octane reader, so that your engine knows, oh, okay, shit, let me back off on the boost now because I haven't got the right kind of fuel, or a catch can, stuff like that, or an overbuilt engine. As long as you're doing preventative mods, generally speaking, you can get away with pretty extreme, inverted commas, modifications, like a turbocharger kit, as long as you're not running extravagant amounts of horsepower. That's where I kind of stand and believe in reliability and stuff. My dad will argue the moment you touch an engine, it's unreliable now. Which with my experiences, unfortunately, that's all I'm having. But with it being said, it's always like the bullshit parts that are breaking for me. It's like coolant pipes that maybe we didn't spend the extra money to get like fancy silicone ones, we just still got rubber replacements. There we go, now it's leaking again. Oh, who would have thought? Or, you know, spending money on a fancy clutch instead of just getting one that I know was going to work. So that's my kind of point. It's usually just like buying rubbish that lands up getting you caught out. Even if you do pay proper money for it, doesn't mean that it's not rubbish. So that's my whole point on the reliability kind of argument. Because again, I daily drove my car for 4 years with the intake pipe and exhaust. I mean, you know, downpipe with a hole in the middle. But my meaning is, I daily drove my car with that intake and stuff, and it did have a little bit more grunt than a normal Miata, or normal 1.6 Miata, I should note. It had a little bit more grunt, and I could put my foot down and it would scream and stuff, and I didn't really have any issues. The only issues I had was not because of the extra power, but unfortunately because of the miscare of previous owners, which was then like the coolant stuff and that whole argument. If you guys have been on the channel for a while, you'll know that whole thing. So that's my point of view, to be honest. Is there anything else I wanted to comment on? Whilst we're all here, let's just take a moment and think about it. If there's anything that you guys have in mind in terms of questions of would this change the reliability, or in terms of you wanted to maybe comment on something I've said or something, please let me know down below. I'd be interested. This is actually quite an interesting topic. I'm enjoying this one. Hence why this video is longer than usual. But yeah, no. I think that's about it. That's all I wanted to comment on. So yeah. Until next time, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. I do just quickly, I understand that this is very late into the video, and I understand that not many people who watch the main videos watch these as well, but for the few who do, I do just want to say a very big thank you for Friday's video, because it's doing pretty damn well. It's gotten over 100 views currently, and it means a lot. Just, I've been struggling recently with YouTube. I've been a bit upset about it because I wish it would pick up a little bit more. I'm trying my best to use this to like promote business and stuff, and it's just a little bit upsetting when you put a lot of time and effort into something and then you get only a very few views. But you know, with that being said, I'm always happy to upload videos anyway, because the few interactions that I get and stuff is always great. So, and I love doing this, and having a chat. I understand I'm currently speaking to a camera, but my meaning is it does feel like I'm chatting to my audience right now. So, yeah, I just wanted to say a big thank you in short. Thanks for the support. Thank you for the support on this video as well. I know that these videos aren't necessarily the most popular, but for the few who do watch it, I very much appreciate it. Thank you very much. So yeah, until next time, guys, I hope you enjoyed. Please leave a like and a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. If you guys have any suggestions on what I should talk about in these podcasts and cars, please leave them down below as well. That would be helpful. Thanks. Until next time, guys. Cheers.